Yeah, you all missed the excitement over here this evening. We decided to have a spontaneous thunderstorm, and we get a little bit of thunder, and our 15-pound cat turns into a very small, low-flying, furry missile. Don't get in his way. He does not like thunder. Anyway, we have 9 o'clock, so we'll get started. So, see, some of you have gotten a jump on the assignment. We'll go over it real quick. See if there's any questions that might be outstanding. There's a couple of things that I'll bring up that are not in the documentation. So briefly, as soon as I find my mouse, this problem that we're looking at is actually a fairly common problem. And it's going to be one of those, if you've been in the field for a while, oh, our logs are filling up. Oh, you mean they didn't set that log rotate correctly again? So, this is going to be something that you will see. It's a nuisance, but it's also vital. Because if log space fills up, and the whole reason for this exercise is when applications stop logging, many of them stop running. But if there's a problem, even if they do keep running and the logs fill up and then something goes wrong, you have no idea why, because you can't log the information. And there's a whole host of arguments on whether you should have it as a separate file system, all those other ancillary issues that you'll find that systems administrators and systems engineers have bordering on religious arguments, and they're all valid. It's just what's valid for this situation. For this company, what does this company require, et cetera. So, but I won't get into a lot of that. But basically, the problem is some of you have already seen, is this is a web server that likes to fill up its space. Very busy web servers, even with low levels of logging, can fill up a disk pretty quickly. If you have debug turned on, and especially if debug's turned on in the applications that are supported by the web server, it can chew up space in a heartbeat. I've had machines that would do 100 gig of logs in one day, which, considering we're supposed to keep 30 days of logs on the machine for regulatory purposes, it got to be a problem pretty quickly. So that was a never-ending battle. Now, the scenario here is you're getting alert received about running out of disk space. Hopefully your NOC is, or equivalent, or systems administrators who are monitoring their Nagios have detected this well in advance of problems. And again, the scenario is there was alert, the log rotate configuration was updated, and it's still not working. Standard logical process in a lot of problems. What's the cause? For a lot of the type of work we do, if we can't identify the cause, we can't fix the problem. So what's the cause? Identify that. Keep in mind, in a more complex problem, sometimes identifying the cause is eliminating what it wasn't. And of course, in this context specifically, we're looking at the log rotate and trying to understand. And there's a piece of information that some have run into, some haven't. It is possible to rotate the logs, but not free up the space. Some logging is what happens is the application opens the log. Programmatically, what happened is it created what's called a file handle. And it's a programming concept that basically says, I have a file that is open for something, read, write, maybe both. But the system knows that somebody's got a handle on this file, and so it won't get rid of space. So while that handle's open, because something still has a hold of it. So if you were to come along and say, remove the file, visibly, if you do an ls, a du, it's not there. It doesn't exist. But if you do a df, it's free. I'm using more space than I think. And it can be, the first time you run into it, it'll drive you nuts. And we'll take time permits, which I believe it will. We'll take a quick look at one tool that can help find that problem. So once we've identified what the issue is, and to finish finish what I'm saying, to fix this problem, and it's not just logs, but files and all types, you have to identify the process that's causing the problem. You have to do something to either kill it or restart it, send it a signal that to say, oh, by the way, I need you to close your logs, but just reminding you, could you open a new one, please? So some applications have that capability. But when in doubt, you're gonna have to do a restart yourself. And that'll be part, of course, in log rotate. Then, of course, what are the solutions? There's a number of possible answers here. If it's something that needs restarted, you may have to restart. If it's something that you can simply rotate it, okay. Do we compress the files? Do we not compress the files? How many do we keep? How often do we do it? You can, my lab back here, I could probably rotate many of my logs once a month, and it's plenty because there's so little traffic. In some places, once a week may be enough. One company I worked for, daily was almost too slow. And of course, when you get into the configurations, you'll see you can compress the files, not compress them. How many do you keep? There's a number of options you have in log rotate. And then, of course, you actually implement the fix to prevent future problems, or at least prevent future problems as far as we can tell today. If you have a small company that the web server is kind of idling along, doing its job, making the company money, and then the company becomes well known, real popular, people start buying your services, things will change. So this is not a one and done situation. Usually you have to keep an eye on it. But most importantly, you're gaining experience in troubleshooting this mess and figuring out how to address the problem. One moment. My glucose meter whining at me again. Okay. So so that you've seen something like this, and you at least have some ideas on how to approach this problem. So the skills we're after: troubleshooting disk spaces, analyzing configurations. Hopefully, along the way, you'll take a moment to read through the documentation and see what all the various options are. You're not going to remember them all, but if you've got something rattling around the back of your brain, you may go, ooh, I remember something like that, and you can go look it up again. Proposing solutions, which is what this one is a big one on, is how do you go about proposing solution, so that whoever has to critique it in this case, me, granted, but still, you may be taking this to your manager, because it's a change. In some environments, you may have to take it to a change board, and change boards, part of their job is to make sure you got your documentation correct and what you're saying makes sense. But keep in mind, their job is to say no. Your job is to convince them to say yes. So how do you propose this problem? Sometimes it's simple, sometimes it's complex. And of course, generally develop some skills in monitoring and optimizing, which is kind of, built into all of this. Like I said, we'll look at a couple of things here in a bit that if the site allows you, are very useful. So kind of as we're talking about, is like, what's the analysis? So, well, as we've already seen, we had a problem. We thought it was fixed. It wasn't. Why? What's filling up the space? We may have had a problem with the web server last week, and we thought we fixed it, but then when we look at it, we see, oh, gee, no, it's not the web server, it's the database server. So it could be something different this week. So what was done last week might be good, might not be, but it's a place to start and investigate what else do we need to do, if anything else, or is it a different problem? And of course here, talking about we're adding the something missing in the log rotate files, be able to explain, understand why it's important. And in an ideal world, where are the reference for this? When in many change boards, if you don't point them to a reference, they may not read it, to be totally honest. But if you don't provide the reference where it could be checked, if somebody decided they felt they needed to, then it's there. For example, working at the bank where I do now, we have to provide a ton of documentation. Why? How? When's it going to be done? Who's going to do it? How do you back it out if something goes wrong? How do you identify that something went wrong? All of the stuff has to be done in advance. It can just putting together the ticket, not all the pre-work to figure out what you need to do, but just the ticket itself of just updating documentation can sometimes take longer than the actual work. But as much of a pain as that is, we're also in an industry, in my case, that is highly regulated, highly scrutinized, and for some reason, people get upset when they go to the ATM's not working. Who knew? Who knew people wanted their money, right? So we have to be very careful. And then, of course, how do we fix it permanently, and how do we keep an eye on it? Some of it is as simple as make sure monitoring is correct. A little bit outside of the scope of this, but those are the kinds of things you should be thinking about. Actually implementing the change in log rotate, or some other method. In some cases, log rotate may not be the right answer. Maybe sometimes an outside thing needs to happen occasionally. And that's some of what you have to consider. Rule of thumb from somebody who's been doing this for a while: if a tool already exists that does it well, log rotate or any of a number of other tools, log rotate in this context, as much as possible, go with that tool. It's been built, it's been tested. A lot of people who are looking at it and using it day to day for, in some cases, very sophisticated uses. And those people are going to break things fairly quickly, which means the tool gets maintained and updated. Makes your job easier. Sometimes you have to go to the effort of writing your own scripts to do things, to use cron, to use all these other functionality. But now the problem is you or someone on your team has to take care of it from now till whenever. Excuse me. And that's long-term maintenance work. If you can keep it to the tools, that's even better. You've got an army of developers keeping an eye on it, as opposed to you having to worry about that part. But you may not have a choice. And then, of course, we're dealing with Docker in this case, and we'll look at the example in a moment. When you're done for the day, or you're done for the session, exit Docker, destroy the container. You want to do that so that it doesn't keep chewing up effectively the budget you have in Google Cloud. So you don't want to chew that up any faster than you can until you're out of the program. And just like the virtual machines we've talked about in the past, you always want to make sure they're cleaned up. Now, in a real production environment, they would stay up, and you'd have other tools to make sure they stay up. And of course, for the final solution, if you've not seen it yet, document the steps you took to identify it and resolve it. Submit screenshots, either attach the screenshots or put them in a Word document or something, some way that the documentation is there, and I can see it to review, of course. Kind of consider me that it's kind of a combination of change control and the final QA. One of the advantages of having a rigorous change environment is, well, paperwork can be a pain. You generally have somebody who's looking over your shoulder to help you find ways to verify things are working. That way, when you're done and you hit that I'm done button and walk out the door, you're not going to get a phone call saying, John, we have a problem and we think it was you. You don't want that. You want to be able to walk away and say, I'm done, and go home, have dinner, go to bed. So the references, which are also in your ticket, is how to manage log files and specifically how to rotate Apache logs. And we'll take a look at those in just a moment. And of course, standard procedure here, hit Google. There's a lot of stuff out there. Google, you want to try ChatGPT, a lot of times Google will, especially for systems type work, if you put the error message or what the problem is up front in the search part, it comes back where it's one of the first couple of things that you're looking for. It's usually pretty good. And of course, any course materials that may apply. Of course, when in doubt, reach out to your tech mentor and ask questions here, of course. So, quick overview. I didn't want to belabor it too much because I know a lot of you have already been working on it. So, questions that haven't gotten an answer on what you think you need to do if you haven't tried to tackle it yet, or even if you haven't, you're not sure if you're going about the right way. Now, okay, let's take a look at this. Let's look at log rotate a little deeper. I'll start with this one. And I've got a virtual machine off to the side here. I'll bring in to for us to take a look at. But log rotate helps address a problem rotating logs. You will find out that there are some logs you can't really log rotate. Log4.js, it's a Java logging function, doesn't play with this. It wants to do its own thing. It's frequently and unfortunately, the parameters are coded in by the developers, and once they go through QA, you can't change the code, of course, because you have to recompile, you have to retest. It's not necessarily what we want in production. So it can be a bit of a battle there. And even though this is an old version of Ubuntu, the basic functionality of log rotate hasn't changed in a while. It's a pretty stable product. But of course, you need to make sure you have it installed. If it's not installed, can't do anything with it. But the biggest areas are, you have your logrotate.conf up in Etsy. And this pretty much sets up your default settings and some certain system logs that nothing else really takes care of it. It takes care of those logs because they're part of the system. But it uses an include, which normally looks at this other directory, etsy logrotate.d. So you can manage things individually instead of having one big file that if you make a typo, everything breaks, which is kind of a problem. And so underneath logrotate.d is where you're probably doing most of your work. So for example, let me unlock this screen. So on mine here, this is a virtual machine. You can see I have a number of individual items. For bootlog, btemp, cronny, DNF, the firewall, Gluster, HTTP, the web server, of course. livevirtd.qemu, which is a virtualization package, much like VMware or VirtualBox. If you're using on your local machine, Mac has one called Parallels. Samba, SSSD. SSSD is one you'll run into as a systems engineer. It has to do with security and authentication. WPA supplicant is for wireless connections. So you have a number of different things, and it's nice to have them separate, because then when things are coming through development into QA, into production, there's a new thing, they can simply provide the file that goes here instead of you having to edit the logrotate.conf. Again, update logrotate.conf. Probably going to be done by hand. Humans are involved. Humans make mistakes, even on the best of days. Trust me, I have accidentally shut down the wrong server. You don't make that mistake very often. But at some point you will make that mistake. Don't panic. You fix it, you own up to it. You'll probably have some manager or VP going, don't do that again. And you go, yes, sir, and move on. It'll happen. So don't panic over it. But for example, let's see. Let's look at Samba for an example. So what we're looking for is how are we rotating Samba? It always starts with a pattern. Samba's logs are going to be var log Samba log dot something. So anything that has that pattern, it's going to match. And we'll look at a couple others in a moment. So what do we want to do? Well, we go through the documentation, but quite simply, we want to compress the file, the rotated file, of course. We're going to use a date for the extension. At most, we're going to keep it for 365 days. But if we look at the next one, it says rotate 99. So it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to rotate all the time, but we're going to keep 99 of them. And the reason is this next one, if the log is empty because it didn't do anything, it won't rotate. But no matter what, even if we have 50, if the log has reached 365 days, we're still going to get rid of it. If it's too old, we don't care. An old directory, this is where the old logs are rotated into. So drop it in there. If there's one in the sequence that's missing, that's okay. So, if you think, log 1, log 2, log 3, log 4, log 7, it's okay that some are missing. And it'll then handle it appropriately. And copy truncate basically says, don't move the file and create a new one. What it does is it makes a copy of the file. So for a moment, you have 2 identical copies on disk. And then the original one will get cleared. It's called truncated in programming. So that the space is freed back up as if it were deleted and recreated. So those are some of your options. Let's look at the top level file. These are all your defaults. So everything's going to start off with this, with these defaults, unless you say otherwise. It's going to rotate once a week. It'll keep 4 copies back, so basically 1 month's worth. It'll create a new file. Instead of the copy truncate, it'll move the old file out of the way and create a new one, which by hand is how you'd probably do it. And of course, at the very end, here's the include we were talking about that says, go grab all those other ones and do the right thing. Let's see, where's the one I'm looking for? May not be on this machine. No, sorry, this machine doesn't have it. Sometimes you'll see on the pattern here more than one pattern. So you can say var log, wtemp space, var log, mail, so that one configuration will handle most. Again, ideally, they're all separate, but certain system ones, you may say, we treat them all the same, we do all the same thing. We're going to do this once because this is not under control of development. We handle it. We're going to have one file. Everything's done consistently instead of having separate files where I may make a typo in one of them. You may see that occasionally, but most of the time I would say is keep them separate. So let's look at this little deeper. The nice thing about this web page, so this is one you want to bookmark and hang on to. is it walks through a couple of simple examples and explains what's going on. So for this guy, keep 12 files, as it says here, rotate once a month. So we're going to keep a year's worth of logs. One of the concerns you'll have is how far back do you need to keep? One company I was at, we were required by contract with some of our customers, even though we kept a copy of every log on another machine, back where it's safe, protected, backed up, the whole 9 yards, where we could do that for basically historical research on what's going on with our products, what's going on with our systems, all in one place. We were required by contract to keep 30 days of logs on the system. And so in that case, we rotate daily, so we had to keep 30 days. But sometimes you'll find if you're not bound by contract, we'd like to keep 30 days on the system, but these logs are so big, we can only keep 14 days. So you have to adjust it again on the fly over time. I really like compressing the log rotated files. It takes up less space. Sometimes that's not quite convenient especially if it's something where you're going to them a lot. But if it's something that's not touched very often, I'd say go with compressed. And here it says missing. Okay, don't write an error message if a log file is missing. Just go with it. Roll. It's fine. We're good. And of course, as we talked about, if it's empty, don't rotate it. We don't need to try to copy a blank file. So what do we do? Well, here's an example. So we're going to have this example app, the var log example app. So under var log, where I believe every log file should go, we're having a separate directory for this application, much like we'll see the web server frequently has its own directory. But again, it's still under var log. And it's always going to be something.log. By convention, that's what we've decided it's going to be. And then this is where we go through and decide what is it we want to do. Well, we want to rotate it daily by default. We like the missing okay because we don't need it to whine if there's if for some reason this wasn't doing something for a while, because one of those things that may not do something for a day or two, then it gets real busy for a day or two. We're going to keep 14. When we rotate daily, we're going to keep 14 back. We'll compress them to save space. If it's empty, don't. That's kind of getting back to the, if it doesn't do anything, that's okay. But some applications, web servers, databases, how the file is owned is important, and sometimes even how the permissions are. So here, this is saying if we're going to create it, when we do the rotate, we're going to create the new file with permission 0640. So read write for the owner, in this case, the application user, read for the group of the application, and no one else can read it. So you, the systems engineer, need to read these logs. You're going to have to become root or have some other mechanism to let you in. We are going to have owner, www-data, as well as the group with the same name, www-data. We're going to have shared scripts. So basically here it says, this flag means any scripts added to the configuration only run once per run for each file rotated. So This is what we're looking at in here. Since this configuration matches 2 log files, the script in the post rotate right here would run twice without this option. Instead, we're having it do it only one time. We're going to rotate. In this case, it's saying 2, which doesn't really tell us here, but a little more information. We're going to rotate them both and then only once do the reload. If we didn't, when it rotated one log, it would reload. Then it rotate the other log and do another reload. For databases, this could be painful because sometimes it takes them a long time to start up. When I worked for a company called Zix, one of the applications we had there before they did some major performance improvements. When it started up, it was many minutes that the application was technically up, but not doing anything because it was still loading all of its configurations for hundreds of customers. So that could be a problem if it's restarting too often. A complication that you don't run into very often, but can be an issue, is in that case, because of that problem, before the performance adjustments, we cannot have all of them rotate their logs at the same time. We had to make sure they were staggered so that if one server had rotated its logs and was going through a restart, not all of them were, which would effectively mean the customers could not do anything. So even there, we had to stagger how it worked. So that was a nuisance. Fortunately, we don't have to do that very often. But one of the things when you make a change, you should always do this. Do I always do it? No, I sometimes get a little overconfident. Yes. Do the debug. Log rotate on the configuration file. Just do logrotate.conf, the top level file. Debug. If there's a problem, it'll tell you. If everything is good, it'll tell you that too. That way, if you have something wrong that could cause a problem, it'll let you know fairly quickly before you have to rely on it. In many applications, there's a way of testing the configuration. My recommendation is to always, before you restart the application, if you've changed configuration files, to run that config check. Matter of fact, if you're in an environment where you're unsure because you've got too many cooks in the kitchen, basically, before you restart, even though you know you didn't change anything, you run the config check just to be safe, that nobody made a mistake somewhere before you, and now it's on you because you're the one who restarted it. Now it's not working. Now you got a problem you got to fix. Whereas if you could run the check beforehand, you can take the restart a little more at your leisure because you know you have a problem before you have a problem. So keep that in mind. And it goes through about creating configurations in home directory where you can basically, you can test your own, you can test the configurations before you put them out there, one way of doing it. Or in this case, you're creating your own. And then you need to first tell log rotate you're going to do this so that it'll set up its environment correctly. I don't see this happening very often. It's doable, but I don't see it. I personally never run into it. So you can't see my screen? I'm sorry, I just saw that. I've been going for a few minutes. Can you see it now? Getting some things out of my way. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. My apologies. And I wish I'd caught that the concern a little sooner. But as I said earlier, we're going through the documentation here. So hopefully my monologue, and when you go back and look at it, sorry, that it'll hopefully make more sense. But the one that you're probably more interested in yeah. So it was a little while back that things stopped working. I'm sorry. Now this one gets into talking about how to handle Apache. Apache is, and many web servers for that matter, frequently are ones that don't close a log file. When they open it, they keep it open forever. The advantage to doing that is it's faster. So if you're putting stuff out very quickly, like some web servers may do, some applications may do, once you've opened the file, excuse me, you can just keep writing, just keep going. Because it turns out opening and closing a file is expensive. So if you have to open it, write a line, close it, open it, write a line, close it. If it's something that happens very quickly, the application will start to, we'll say back up, but basically the performance will start to degrade where it can't handle requests as fast as it could. So a lot of those applications will open it, keep it open. And so that's why, we're talking about some things you have to do the reload. Now, there's a number of security features that could be used in Linux. They do tend to write and close because they're not something that generally has activity constantly. It's a flurry of activity. So if it gets a little slow, that's okay because you're probably not going to notice anyway. But their concern is they want to get the stuff out to the disk, the file closed, everything flushed the disk where it's safe, as safe as it can be, for potential future investigation. So they're not concerned about performance, they're concerned about securing the data. Those, you can just simply rotate them. No big deal. Apache, databases, Nginx, those ones off the top of my head. All of those, you're probably going to have to restart the application. Now, with things like databases, you're going to want to be careful when this is done because that is shutting down a database and restarting it can be very expensive in time. So you may not want to do that. That's knowing the environment. Now, you will see arguments like this where they say, use Apache's rotate logs. It's more elegant. Maybe. One of the balances you have to do, just like the log4j in Java, the rotate logs in Apache, how many things do you need to rotate logs, and does it gain you? If it doesn't gain you, okay, it's not as slick, it's not as cool, it's not as elegant, but it works and it's maintainable. Then you may say, we're doing it the old-fashioned way with log rotate. But if it turns out you're doing something that is much very specific to that machine, for example, that machine does nothing but run Apache. Then you may want to do this because it may be a gain. So you have to weigh these options. Most of the systems I've worked on, we simply use log rotate, except for the log4j stuff in Java. That was an operations battle that I lost because it created some problems for us with the decisions that the developers chose. There's a number of them others out there. Chronolog, as it mentions here. There's a number of different ones. We're only focusing on the one for today. Some of the advantage of some of these others is you can be a little more granular in when you rotate and how you rotate. Log rotate tends to operate on a specific time, and that time will be this, and as fast as it can march through all the configurations and do the work. Consequently, everybody will rotate at about the same time if we're looking at daily or even weekly for that matter, because it'll take time to march through all those configurations. Let's see, let's bring this back. Okay, the ones we're looking at so you can actually see them. Let's see, we're looking at Samba as one of them. So again, Samba, as I was saying earlier, varlog, its own application directory, Samba, and they all start log something. So var Samba. So you can see we have no logs in this case. There is an old directory which has nothing. Can you guess why there's no logs? Well, the simple answer is I'm not running Samba, so it's not creating any logs. The configuration is one of the base ones that's comes with the system. But the web server, that's one I added because this machine has a web server. It's basically a development server. And so things, so we do have logs. Now you can see I rotate weekly, and I'm using the date format instead of the sequential count. We have two logs, the access log and the error log. But for example, the error log, you can see these are all pretty small. This is the biggest one I have right here. But in general, they're all pretty small. So I'm not worried about compression. And even my access logs, you can see, are not very big. So that, let's see, little over 1 meg per week. Not really worth fighting with compression. I have the convenience of just simply being able to look at the log files. So no. So if I'm having a problem, I can look at the two logs. Let's see. Var log HTTPD. Oh, underscore log. So let's type it correctly, so I can easily read what's going on without having to uncompress and play some other games. But as you can see, mostly what's happening is this guy. Check HTTP. If you remember Nagios from a handful of weeks back, guess what's generating my log files on this machine? So you can see that's all we're seeing. Oh, there's probably some other stuff in here, but I hadn't been doing a lot with the web server on this machine. And if we go to the error log, I just jump to the next one. Again, I can very easily see what's going on. That's the advantage of not compressing. The downside is on a busy machine, it'll take up more space. Now, a problem that you may run into, as I mentioned earlier, it is possible under the right conditions for you to delete a file and still have the space filled. LSOF is your friend, if it's on the machine or if you're allowed to install it. And as you can see, it's very busy. There's a lot going on. Let's stretch this out a little bit. Let's grep for the web server information. You can see just that alone is pretty busy. That's just one service. So what's going on here? Well, if we look carefully, we can see there's a lot of things happening in the system. We're opening libraries of various kinds. We have various sockets open. That's what this one is here. I'm not sure what event poll is. That's a new one to me. We have pipes, which are an in-memory concept to pass information. Now, this is interesting. Notice that's our log file. What would happen if, while it's open and we were to delete it, we can still find it in here. So we could grep for access log, for example. Better yet, let's grep for log. So I want things attached to the web server with the name login. So you can see we have a number of things going now. Keep in mind, Apache has multiple processes. So we are seeing a number of different, things that are trying to talk to it. But now we can find it. Now, if we didn't know it was Apache, we just know the name of the file. Sometimes it's not real clear in the application. We can grep for the file, find the application and the user, and then we can get after it because now we know what we're looking for. And from this, we can then, go back and find the process ID in the process table. We can start comparing things to figure out which one we're trying to deal with. And then once we've done that, we know we need to, if we didn't know it was an HTTPD log, just that it was a web server access log, for example, you may have more than one web server running. And if things are misconfigured and people decide they're going to put all the stuff in one place, is this the access log for Apache, or is this the access log for late HTTP, or is this the access log for Nginx? Don't know. So we'd be able to look for it and find the one that is not where we expect it to be, because when we do the LS, we don't find it. And we can then back it up to the process. Sometimes takes a little investigation, but LSOF, if you have access to it, is a godsend. And then, of course, in this case, restart HTTPD. You're just now your tied up space is done, gets released back to the system, and magically your disk went from 95% full to 60% full because that file's been running for a long time. So you'll see like things like that happen from time to time. Questions on it? Like I said, this is something that's potentially useful. There are a lot of options to LSOF. Oops, type it right. File this one away in your back pocket. It could be useful in the future. I really hate having a system that doesn't have it, but sometimes for security purposes, for example, at the bank, often tools like this, by security standards, are not allowed. Even though the only person who can run that is a systems administrator like me, but it doesn't matter. Security policy says you can't have it. So we have to hunt it the hard way. Make sense? Hopefully you find that useful. Any questions that you may still have, since we're getting toward time? Yes, it is. It is very nice. Completely unrelated. You want to learn Nmap as well. That's another one you want to keep in your back pocket. It for network mapping, so you can see what ports are open either on your local machine or a remote machine. If you have it, top is very useful. This one is currently processing which things are using the most CPU, and you can sort by the different columns. What's the other one? There's another top command. I'm drawing a blank on it. But there's a number of diagnostic utilities out there like that. Keep your eyes open and make a note of them. And if you can get them on the system when problems crop up, even better. So, questions, comments? Getting late and it's time for bed. Yes. I'm going to be up for at least another couple hours helping my wife with machine learning, so it's not bedtime for me yet. Thank you. So with that, doesn't look like there's any questions. We'll call it a wrap there, and I will see you on Tuesday. Good night.